What's up, family? Man, this feels like Groundhog Day, man. Every 2 or 3 weeks, there's another Latino coming out trying to argue the point that they were co-creators of hip hop. Um, Welcome, Nicolas Barili, to the controversy. Now, this guy got a lot of money behind him. He did a docu-series trying to establish Latinos as co-creators of hip hop. And so before I get into this particular clip from Hot 97, let me say this. I did watch the first episode of his docuseries, which focused on New York. And so what he tries to do in this particular episode is try to uh, point out the evidence that Latinos were part of the creation of hip hop. Let me say for the record, he failed to do that. But what does facts have to do with anything or truth? He still makes the claim, nevertheless. And so it's important to understand who this guy is and where he's from. So he's from Argentina. So I don't want to paint a picture of him because I don't know him, but I do know of the country where he's from. And this might give some insight as to who he is. All right. Argentina is considered the whitest country in South America, which is odd considering that, like Brazil, they were colonized and subject to Spanish colonists shipping in African slaves from the west coast of the African continent. Currently, Argentina's population of European ethnicity constitutes 97% of the population. This is a disturbing figure taking into account that by the late 1700s, nearly 50% of the population in the interior of the country was black, and between 30 to 40% of the population of Buenos Aires was black or mulatto, reported the Root. When asked about Afro-Argentines, most Argentinians believe that Argentinians never took part in the slave trade, or that the Afro-Argentines left Argentina naturally. Both of these theories are wrong. What actually happened to Black Argentinians is so disturbing and inhumane, it would be shocking that it wasn't being taught in classrooms if the world wasn't so inherently racist. It is widely reported that the president of Argentina from 1868 to 1874, Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, undertook a covert genocide that wiped out the Afro-Argentinian population to the point that by 1875, there were so little black people left in Argentina that the government didn't even bother to register African descendants in the national census. So this gives you a sense, possibly, what the motives of this particular guy is. Maybe there's some white supremacy agenda behind this. Clearly it is, despite where he's from, but clearly this might give some insight as to why he's pushing this agenda. All right, so Nicolas Barili, this is his name. He appeared on Hot 97 to discuss his new documentary called De La Calle. All right, so this is how we're going to do it. We're going to let him give his overview, and I'm going to interject, and I'm going to actually use some of the audio clips from the documentary to highlight some of the things that he's saying in this particular overview. I'm going to provide some screenshots as well from the documentary. YouTube won't allow me to upload the video due to the fact that it's on a streaming service. So let's get involved. Let's do this. Let's go.
What up? What up? How y'all doing?
Chilling, man. So tell us about De La Calle.
De La Calle started off as a concept 10 years ago. It started off as I wanted to do a documentary telling the stories of Latinos' contributions to hip hop because, as you mentioned, running Hard Knock for the last almost 20 years, I just felt like a lot of our stories weren't really being told. So I was like, man, I'm going to take it upon myself to help tell the story. So it evolved from that to I partnered up with a production company that did Anthony Bourdain's show, and we turned it into a travel series where I just kind of mapped out not only Latinos' contributions to hip hop in New York, but also how those seeds went to different places in Latin America, were mixed up with like local cultures and different sounds, and then kind of, if you want to call it a gumbo, was made in all these different cities and countries that then evolved into what we now call reggaeton and Latin trap and bachata and a bunch of different genres.
Now, this is
Okay, so then let's ask you this question too. And again, De La Calle is out right now on Paramount Plus. You can watch the whole series, and I know you delve into the Latinos and the formation of hip hop story. What is the most when you watch that conversation playing out, and it seems like there's a lot of it about, for some reason, people fighting against Latinos being part of the origin story in hip hop. What's
Well, they're not part of the origin story. That's the problem. They're not part of the origin story. They came later. All right?
sort of frustrates you the most in that conversation, and were you able to uncover anything that you think will be really helpful for that conversation moving forward?
I had a simple mission. My mission was, let me talk to the people who were there, because anyone else who joins the conversation who wasn't there, it's like, what do you know? So it's like a lot of our pioneers are still alive. A few of them have passed away, but a lot of our pioneers are alive. So I was like, let me go talk to the people who were actually there. So not only do we talk to a lot of the pioneers who were there on the Latin side, but you have somebody like Grand Wizard Theodore, who's credited as inventing scratch, and he's pretty much saying, if you think Latinos weren't part of creating hip hop, you're a liar. He's like, I was there. So it's like,
okay. Now, Theodore does say that Latinos were a part of hip hop, but he did not say that Latinos created hip hop. So let me play the actual audio of Theodore making that claim.
This is the man who invented scratch. Yeah, you heard right. Invented scratch. Grand Wizard Theodore.
You got graffiti artists that's Latino. You got b-boys, DJs, everything. Everything in hip hop, the whole culture. Latinos played a big part of it. And if anybody say anything otherwise, I call them a liar, man.
So Nicholas, he quoted him pretty accurately, but he put the word create. Theodore didn't say they created. He just said they were a big part of it. Now, I would say they're a big part of it. As you know, the 70s, or let's say the 80s approached, they became a big part of it as the 80s approached. I would say 77, 78, 79, they became a bigger part. And definitely into the 80s, they were a big part of hip hop. All right? So let's go. Let me play this clip of Grand Wizard Theodore when he was much younger, talking about the origins or the history of hip hop.
Artists, people who want to be hip hop. Well, the only thing I gotta say is that, you know, if you're going to get into hip hop, know what hip hop is. Know where it came from. You know, you gotta know where it came from in order to know where it's going. Learn about Africa Bambaataa, learn about Kool Herc, learn about DJ Jones, DJ Flowers, and all those people. Learn about the history of hip hop before you actually get into it. That way you can know the difference between hip hop and rap.
Now, listen to that. He even makes a distinction between hip hop and rap. So at that stage of his career, he didn't even acknowledge rapping as hip hop. For him, it's DJ culture. So he even mentioned Pete DJ Jones and DJ Flowers. Now, many people wouldn't even consider them hip hop DJs, but Theodore do consider them hip hop DJs. Now, he mentioned Herc and Bambaataa, but they were African Americanized. It's strictly an African American culture. All right. Now, you notice who he didn't mention. He didn't mention no Latinos. So how can they be part of the origin story if they're not even mentioned? All right, let's continue.
we can have this conversation all you want, and I'd love to have it. And I hope people watch the episode so that we can actually have a conversation.
Right.
When people see the people who've contributed to the culture. But part of the reason why I created this was because I kept hearing, oh, Latinos are visitors in hip hop, or, you know, Latinos are guests in hip hop. And it's like,
and you are guests, you are, contributors, you are the first students. That's just a fact. You guys got to live with that. Let's go.
Like, you just weren't there, and you don't know your history if you're saying that. Like, it's just flat out the way it is. Like, we can go back to, first of all, graffiti started 10 years before we give hip hop credit for when it started, right? So graffiti culture was already out there.
Okay, let's start with that. Now, you know me, I don't really give two hoots about graffiti. However, he interviewed this graffiti artist named Lady Pink. Let's listen to what she has to say.
One of the first women to make a name for herself in male-dominated streets was Lady Pink. How do you feel that graffiti plays into the elements, and what's your take on, this idea that there's 4 elements that make a culture?
4 elements.
Breaking, rapping, graffiti.
I don't like that. I don't care for that.
Lady Pink.
She says she don't care for that 4 element stuff in graffiti. Let's go.
Was and still is fearless. At only 16, she painted whole subway trains in the dark, developing a style all her own.
Graffiti was a decade old before they even invented the word hip-hop. So we're not all stereotype hip-hop people. We all listen to different music and have different lifestyle. Am I hip-hop? I don't know, man. You tell me. You tell me.
I think there's different things what it means to be hip-hop.
Well, there you go. So now he did interview other graph artists who do consider themselves part of hip hop. But like I said, it's really a genre all to itself. It's thousands of years old. So I'm not really, for that inclusion. That was Bambaata's idea. And I guess he did it for inclusion purposes. All right, let's continue.
There's people contributing to graffiti from hip hop. And then, in the 70s, you have a lot of the groups had Latinos in them. Cold Crush Brothers, DJ Charlie Chase was a Latino, Puerto Rican DJ. So it's like, you have people like Disco Wiz. You have people like Mr. Schick, who I mentioned before. You have people like Whip a Whip. Like, Latinos were there. And I think one of the issues that we came across in the episode.
All right. Now, those are the usual suspects. You hear those names all the time. No one can seem to come up with different names. And all these names are late 60s. I mean, not late 60s, late 70s. All right. None of them are early 70s. It's late 70s. Let me play this, guys, for you. Now, this video clip is from Van Silk's channel. And he interviews a couple of guys, not Richard Schick, but Mr. Schick and Ruby D. And Ruby D is going to speak to the number of Latinos that were involved in the late 70s. If you listen to some of these other guys like Cologne and this gentleman here, Nick Barili, you would think that the numbers was much higher. But let's listen to this particular portion of the interview.
Now, Ruby D, you came in the game at a different era, before records. How did
with
you
the L
feel
brothers?
when you was with Theodore and rest in peace, Donna Rock and Waterbed, Kevin Master Rob, and all these black guys? How did you feel at that time?
Well, you know what?
And
I'm gonna go back
later. How did you feel at that point? Being like,
hey, I'm gonna take it back about a year and a half more. When I first got down with the L brothers. And I was the only Hispanic person in the club. Regardless where you went, I was the only Hispanic person in the club. Then when I got down with when things happened and Fantastic Five was formed, still in all, there was nobody out there really. As far as Latinos, there was, DJ, Charlie Chase, Disco Wiz, Whip a Whip came up later on.
what years are we talking?
We're talking about 76. I was down with the L Brothers for about a year and a half, if I'm not mistaken, before the Fantastic Four was formed, which was me, Kevin, Rob, and Theodore. And then from there, Rob is a scoutmaster, so he brought Doc and Whip along. And when Whip first got down, I did not know he was Hispanic. It was on a conversation one day, and it came out. He spoke Spanish, and I was like, "Whoa, yo, what's going on here?" You know. But before that,
and hold on, Ruben. I want everybody to please understand that we're not trying to take anything from anybody Hispanic that came along, but
no.
74, 75, 76, hurricane, all that. It's if we had the pictures,
if you were
shown, and I just want people to understand.
If you were out there at that time, you was making some noise, or you just wasn't there. That's the way I see it. You know, you don't, like you say, you'd have been out there. You'd have been in the club. You'd have been at the block parties. You'd have been at. We didn't know about you. We didn't know about you. And I say we, I meant hip hop. We didn't know about you.
Well, there you have it, man. So here, Ruby D telling it like it is. You know, there weren't that many Latinos out at the time he was doing it. You know, so no one is trying to erase Latinos as foundational Black Americans are being accused of. We're just trying to tell the truth. You guys are trying to minimize our contributions and our creations. That's what you're trying to do by trying to inject and inflate the numbers of Latinos that were involved in the early period. A lot of you are guilty of pushing your dates back to 74, 75, and a lot of you were not active until probably 77, 78, 79, definitely the 80s.
I think one of the issues that we came across in the episode is I think sometimes people see darker skinned folks and they assume that they're Black and they don't have Latino background. And I think that's one of the things that when we talk to someone like a Jim Jones, who's part Puerto Rican, we talk to someone like Dave East, who's part Dominican. It's like there's a lot of people, especially in New York, who migrated from the Caribbean, who might be darker skinned, who still have Latino heritage. So. Right.
It's the culture, stupid.
I don't want to sound mean about it, but man, this is not difficult. We're talking about culture. We're not talking about ethnicity or nationality. We're talking about a particular group of people, foundational Black Americans, that created a culture that everyone else participated in. Okay? It's not a multicultural or multicultural creation, as you want us to believe. The first time there was an element of cultural contribution was Mr. Shake and the Mean Machine, where he introduced Spanish. Prior to that, there wasn't any. So that was the first time that there was a multicultural contribution to hip hop. Prior to that, it didn't exist. Now think about it this way. Ruby D would be probably the one person who would know if there was a Latino or Afro-Latino in the mix. Clearly, he didn't see anybody. He was always surrounded by Black Americans. That's all he knew. So this whole idea that somehow there was all these Afro-Latinos around and no one knew is ridiculous. But even if they were, it doesn't take away from the claim that foundational Black Americans are making, which is that we created the culture and you guys came later. All right, Nick referenced Jim Jones and Cameron. Let's hear what they have to say.
Somebody told me a long time ago about hip hop. He said, if you look at all these videos of Press Mute, everybody gonna look like they're from New York. Like that, right?
Harlem natives Jim Jones and Cameron were family members of diplomats back in the late 90s, which was later joined by Joel Santana. I remember coming to New York in the early 2000s as a broke college student, and their music was everywhere. People were playing Dipset at the parks, in the clubs. You couldn't turn a corner without hearing the music. Every few years, I feel like on the internet, a list will pop up, and it'll say, rappers you don't know have Latino heritage. And I feel like every couple of years, one or both of your names are on there. Yeah, I identify as Puerto Rican all the time. It's just that I grew up in a black household. My mom was on the side is West Indian, they're black, so I didn't grow up with my pops. So I always hold on my heritage. And right now I'm working on finishing my Spanish album called Broken Spanish. Oh, crazy. I feel like you've been working, both of you have, with rappers with Latin descent. Latino artists all your career. I mean, for you, like Hector Espada, Stego, Don Juan, like, you work with Don Juan too. King of Kings. King of Kings. Big project, man. Why was that important for you from an early stage? Just as much as it's in our heritage, you know, Harlem has a big Latino Spanish community. I actually grew up with a Spanish godmother in my house, and I spoke Spanish for the first maybe 3 to 4 years of my life. You know, I kind of lost it. I always just felt, connected to that. In Harlem, Spanish and black is synonymous. Yep. In hip hop, Spanish artists are the minority. It's always been that way. I can't tell you why. Do you feel that there's a preconception in some people? They think like, oh, if you're black, you're not Latino, where in fact, that's not true. It's like there's a ton of Afro-Latinos and all over Latino. We're all the same thing. Black is Latino, Latino is black. There's no difference. They stopped and dropped us off in different islands on this side. You heard? And that's how we created from the Puerto Rico island, from the Haitians on the Haiti island. Like, that's how it goes and things like that. We all up against the same struggle. And that's what hip-hop culture is about. But all of these races all go through the same struggle.
All right, so this is what I don't want to call it tether babble, but we're not the same. Culturally, we're different. And so I just think it's not correct to try to claim something another culture has created because we share similar skin tone. And that's what I hear Jim Jones saying, even though he is part foundational Black American, from what I understand. But he's speaking for other Afro-Latinos who may not be foundational Black Americans, as if their skin tone or their struggle, makes hip hop their culture. Now, let me play something that Pop Master Fable has said. He says something quite similar.
Pop Master Fable, one of the foremost historians of hip-hop dance, has been popping and locking for over 40 years. And now he gives back to the community by serving as a professor at NYU and teaching at dance studios like this one. People at breaking, are they the same name for different dances, or is it different names for the same dance?
Different names for the same dance. Whereas the West Coast gave birth to popping and locking.
Would you say that, like, rumba, salsa, mambo, capoeira, would you say that there's elements of that that's sprinkled into breakdancing or any similarities?
Absolutely, especially rock dance.
Now, we heard that rock dance being suggested by someone else we always, listen to or heard of. Again, I did a video on the rock dance and the origins of it, and it's definitely rooted in African American culture. However, they added their thing to it, but they didn't create it, but they added their flavor to it. And that's all good. But don't say you create it if you know where the root is. Let's go.
So, yo soy Boricua, Puerto Rican, right? So, we're practically born dancing, right? Growing up Puerto Rican, quite often in your family you have a santero, right? This is a spiritual path that came from Nigeria. And some of the movement, like Ogun, cuts sugarcane with a machete, right? You might see some remnants of this in rock dancing, So for instance, there's a move called the jerk. We kind of do this and jerk down, boom, right? This is una limpieza, right?
Spiritual.
Yeah, you're cleansing So to me, I have no doubt that our African roots, via the diaspora and all of that, we have the cultural DNA in us already. So hip hop is a natural inheritance.
What was it like getting ready before you?
All right, so he's playing the African card. Now, think about what he said. He said hip hop is their natural inheritance. Whose natural inheritance? The people who created it are foundational Black Americans. It's their natural inheritance. But what he's using is the African card because apparently we're from the same diaspora. So again, our accomplishments as foundational Black Americans are their accomplishments and their achievements. So it's their natural birthright by way of the African diaspora. However, foundational Black Americans don't rely on African diaspora or African spirituality to have created hip hop. That comes from jazz, that comes from blues, R&B, soul, funk. That is our inspiration, which has nothing to do with the diaspora. But this is how they try to interject themselves in our achievements by way of the African card. All right, let's see what else good old Nick Barili has to say.
Might be darker skinned who still have Latino heritage. So
right,
it's like
both. They're Black and Latino.
Wow.
Right.
Concept. Crazy.
Right.
You know, so like this idea that Latinos somehow weren't there, it's like, yeah, maybe for a while Latinos weren't the biggest MCs at the time, and I think as hip hop evolved, you know, from the DJ being the front and center to the MC being front and center, I think in that transition, maybe some of the Latinos weren't, you know, as big as MCs until we get to like the Puns and the Fat Joes. But it's like that doesn't mean that we didn't help contribute to the culture. Hip hop culture, last time I checked, isn't just MCing. It's DJing, it's breakdancing, it's graffiti, and in the New York episode, you will see Latinos and Latinas who contributed to all those elements from the early stages. So
now, what foundational Black Americans are saying is exactly what you just said right there. You guys contributed. Why are you making the argument about contribution? We agree that you guys contributed. But you're also making an argument about creation. That's where the pushback is. You're talking about more of contribution, and then you're trying to parlay that into creation. Let's go.
So I'm happy to have this conversation. I'm obviously very passionate about it. And, you know, like Joe Conzo says at the end of episode 1, it's on us to tell the story. Like, yes. You can't let other people tell our story. Like, that's why it was important for me to bring in Latino crews so that we can go tell the story and really provide a platform for our pioneers and the people who contributed to the culture to help tell that story so we can open this conversation. And there's people who didn't even make it on the documentary who also contributed. So it's like we're just starting to peel the onion. But for me, it was important to really have something out there with the voices of the people who've contributed to hip hop since the early days.
Which I think.
All right, so let's talk about good old Joe Conzo. For some reason, he convinced himself that he is a pioneer. All right, let's listen to now, because actually Joe Conzo was interviewed by Nick. He didn't really, you know, it wasn't that much, but let me play a portion of that.
I can only imagine what going to South Bronx High School in the 80s might have been like. But thanks to this man, I can get a pretty good idea. I feel like every couple of years, people start saying, oh, Latinos are visitors to hip hop.
Visitors. We're not visitors. Latinos were there from the inception.
Joe Conzo. Like, we have to change that. We need our peers and the seeds who birthed all this need to get their flowers, and people need to hear from them first.
The onus is on us. It is our responsibility to document our story and not let somebody else tell the story.
We were there. Latinos were not witnesses, not guests, but co-creators of this culture.
Absolutely not. You were not co-creators. Let me play this clip. This is an old clip. I'm sure everyone's seen it, but let's just check it out. So in this clip, Jen asks a very pertinent question. Does one race have a right to claim hip hop? And watch Joe Conzo try to answer the question, but he gets checked by Cass.
He had the foresight.
Let me ask a question. So, to my understanding, it seems like you guys kind of are all saying the same thing. Is hip hop something that a person, a race, an ethnicity could say, we invented this, it is ours, and everybody came after?
Can I say something real quick?
Now notice the silence from the other Puerto Ricans. That's telling, but old Joe Conzo, he's brave. He's going to answer the question.
Quickly, hey, listen. Back in the 70s, 60s, maybe a little earlier, the Bronx is the melting pot of all ethnic groups. Huge migration of people to the Bronx, okay? And that's who created, or that's who put together this culture that we love so much. You know, hip hop was birthed in the Bronx, and hip hop holds no color boundaries or ethnic boundaries. I mean, we had Jewish cats breaking. You know,
doing graffiti.
Like you know.
I mean, keep it a buck. I mean, hip hop, like basketball, was predominantly black. Okay. And I remember, and my man Disco Wiz ain't here right now, but Disco Wiz, you know what I mean? We was friends in school. And when I told him I was DJing, I put him down with me. We started DJing together. And we would just, as friends, just walk through the neighborhood, walk down streets. We used to dress alike and shit. And he would catch flack from Puerto Ricans, Latinos. They would like stop him when we was walking and say something to him in Spanish. And I could tell that something was wrong because he would hand me his hat. Yeah. And I seen him knock 3 or 4 people out for saying, why you hanging with that fucking Moreno? All right. So it wasn't all everybody kumbaya. We was at that point in our youth where we was in the park, and most of the Puerto Ricans was in the handball court. And most of the black people was on the basketball court. Now, did black people play handball? Yeah, but it was predominantly Puerto Ricans. Did Puerto Ricans play basketball? Yeah, but it was predominantly black. And that's the same thing for hip hop.
And we were in the same park.
Right, that's what I said.
Yeah, in the same hood.
Let me speak to that because it's extremely, extremely important. What Kaz said, predominantly, right, is the key word. Not totality, predominantly, right? Hip hop.
Now she's trying to play on that word predominantly. Now you heard how Ruby D described what it was like. Kaz in his interview with Vlad, if you guys remember that, he said 1 or 2. That's what it was like that. So what Jen is trying to offer, predominant as if it was 60-40 or 70-30. No, it was more like 98 to 2%. That's what it was like in the early days. So don't play with the word predominant. There's enough information out there that we know that Latinos early on and from the mid 70s to the later 70s, the numbers were very small. It wasn't really till the 80s that the numbers really picked up. That's the truth. So Joe Conzo failed, because I'm glad Cash checked him. And I think what happens is because everybody has got a lot of relationships with Puerto Ricans, they figure, let's invite him on the panel and maybe he'll back us up. You know what I'm saying? But credit to Kaz, he called it like it was. He kept it a buck, and I'm glad he did that. And he checked Conzo on that BS. Now, what's interesting to me is that the Latinos are accusing us of trying to marginalize them. when in actuality, there's a big organization of music companies, execs, industry personnel, streaming services, companies, persons are trying to rewrite the history of hip hop and try to put Latinos, if not over us, but at least on the same level as us, so that they could claim hip hop. So they don't have to say that they got it from us. This is big. And although it didn't start with Fat Joe, he became the face of it. And you got a whole bunch of other people falling behind this. So this is not the last. Nick Barili is not the last. There'll probably be more. But again, hey, we got to do what we got to do. All right. Please like, share. If you aren't a subscriber, please, I would love to have you. We got some great things, as I always promise. We got some great things on the horizon. Until the next time, peace.